Yep. And I'll do the
I need
regular
glasses.
number
Okay.
531.
531? I thought it was 541. 531?
That's 531.
531. Okay.
By Ralph Waldo Emerson, The Oversoul. And so I'd like to invite this half of the room, and you folks can choose which side you want to be part of. Well, we will read it antiphonally to each other. So I invite those on this side of the room to join me with the regular type, and the italics will join with Sally.
Me.
Okay? The Oversoul. Let us learn the revelation of all nature and thought, that the highest dwells within us, that the source of nature are in our own mind.
As there is no screen or ceiling between our heads and the heavens, so there is no bar or wall in the soul where we, the effect, cease, and God, the cause, begins.
I am constrained every moment to acknowledge a higher origin events than I call mine.
There is deep power in which we exist and whose beatitude is accessible to us.
Every moment when the individual is invaded by it is memorable.
It comes to the lowly and simple. It comes to whoever will put off what is foreign and proud. It comes as insight. It comes as serenity and grandeur.
The soul's health consists in the fullness of its reception.
Forever and ever, the influx of this better and more universal self is new and unsearchable.
Within us is the soul of the whole, the wise silence, the universal beauty in which every part and particle is equally related, the eternal one.
When it breaks through our intellect, it is genuine. When it breathes through our will, it is virtue. When it flows through our affections, it is love. Lovely.
With thanks to Ralph Waldo.
Waldo Emerson.
Now, I was, by all reports, a highly imaginative child. My mother reports that she described it as I was often off with my head in the clouds. As I remembered, I would indeed spend times on my own, either in the imaginary world of books or in the fields and woods near our home, where I would imagine my own stories unfolding. For most of my childhood, we lived in a partially developed suburb south of Salem, and we were pleased that we had the option of there was a 5-acre abandoned orchard next door that was not developed until long after I had left home. And there were woods between my home and my neighborhood school. I spent many hours in that orchard and in those woods. My real and imaginary play spaces were, to me, magical. I went into them seeking and occasionally finding my rainbow connection. I remember one very special, what I now label as a mystical experience from my childhood. It was during my 10th or 11th summer. I was off on my own, farther from home than I usually wandered, in a neighborhood park. The park was mostly scrub grass with a few tables and scattered trees, and standing castle-like in the middle was a metal jungle gym. This climbing tower was constructed of metal pipe bolted together in a series of rectangles about 3 feet by 6 feet in size. Each rectangle had a central connecting rod. On the first level, there were 12 squares. The next level, I think there were about 8. And then it went down to 4 and 2, and up on the top was one rectangle. The ultimate challenge of this tower was to climb to the highest level and then stand with 1 foot on each of the top bars straddling the very tip top. It was a precarious move and one that adults would not tolerate. So it was something we kids did when no one was looking. You'd put a hand on each side and then clutching very tightly, bring your feet up one at a time so that you were perched just kind of crab-like on the top frame. Then you'd move your hand closer to your feet and then reach one behind you and put one on the middle bar and then boldly and slowly move to standing upright. Ta-da! It was scary, as a fall would result in at least a smash on a lower bar and all the bumps and bruises and potential broken bones that might happen. Though, what I remember from that one particular evening is not my precarious momentary ta-da, but what happened next. After I stepped down from the top bar and just stood there near the top. The sky was beginning to change color. The soft hues of the coming sunset tinted the clouds. It would soon be time to head for home, but the evening was so sweet. So I lingered there in the midst of the top level of that metal tower. I was no doubt feeling the surge of the adrenaline rush from my earlier maneuver when suddenly I felt something deeper, much deeper than that momentary thrill. Standing there in the sky, I sensed a profound connection to all that is. The colors of the almost sunset sky seemed more intense and more translucent than anything I had ever seen. I was bathed in soft light. The gentle breeze softly caressed my skin, and all around the world seemed to be filled with a silent yet clearly present vibration. Every part and particle of my being experienced this deep connection. Cannot tell you how long I stood there, awestruck by the incredible beauty and the deep, deep pace in which I was held. This all-encompassing sense of connection was beyond anything I could then articulate, and it was kind of scary. I spoke to no one about it for many years. I wondered back then if it had something to do with the deep spiritual bonding I was told at my Christian fundamentalist church that I might experience if I accepted fully the truth that they offered me there. But what I experienced that evening was not about any person or any teaching or any rules. It was about something within and all around. I worried what people might think, if they might think I was kind of crazy if I told them about my feelings. So I kept my experience safe inside. And it stayed here and here with me my whole life as a foundational cornerstone for my deepest beliefs. And I imagine, as did Emerson and many of his fellow seekers, that such a deep power exists and is accessible to all. I imagine and I know. I knew that within us is the soul of the whole, the wise one, the universal beauty to which every part and particle is equally related. Though in that playground evening encounter I lacked Emerson's skill at articulation, I knew. I knew. I knew through my own experience. Now, back in the 19th century, actually 18th century, in Concord, Massachusetts, Ralph Waldo Emerson, Waldo to his friends, along with his dear friends Henry David Thoreau and Branson Alcott and Nathaniel Hawthorne and Margaret Fuller and others came together as a community of dreamers and seekers. They came to be called the Transcendentalists, and their experience and their viewpoint came to shape what has become Unitarian and Unitarian Universalist thought. Now, that group would meet regularly at the Emersons' home in Concord, Massachusetts, and stay over dinner, and the conversations would often last well into the night. They would explore questions of meaning, of spirit, of faith, and what one finds ultimate. Reverend Meg Barnhouse called them a genius cluster. They walked together and they talked. She tells us that they talked intensely about Eastern philosophies of Hinduism and Buddhism, just coming into the American consciousness, and about the abolition of slavery and women's suffrage. I imagine that sometimes they might have strolled over to Emerson's woodlot on a pond called Walden, where his friend Henry David lived for a time in a self-built cabin on that pond. You may have heard of it. In a sermon titled The Oversoul, Rev. Meg offered a list of the basic tenets of American transcendentalism. Now, she cautioned that this list must not be considered to be a creed common to all transcendentalists. It's merely a grouping of certain important concepts shared by many of them. Her list reads in part: the human soul is part of the oversoul, or universal spirit. Therefore, each individual is to be respected because everyone has a portion of the oversoul, or life force, or God. This oversoul, or life force, or God can be found everywhere, a deep power in which we exist. The divine can be found in both nature and human nature. More important than a concern about the afterlife should be a concern for this life. Emerson said, the one thing in the world of value is the active soul. Emphasis should be placed on the here and now. Give me one world at a time, said Thoreau. Evil is merely an absence of good and not a force in its own light. Light is more powerful than darkness because one ray of light penetrates the darkness. One must have faith in intuition and experience, for no church or creed can communicate truth. The unity of life and universe must be realized. There is a relationship, an interconnectedness between all things. The first step on these speakers' journey of exploration was to open themselves up to the power of imagination. In an essay titled Emerson and Calling the Imagination Home, Dr. Sarah Wilder, a professor of literature and women's study and a former president of the Ralph Waldo Emerson Society, said, speaking about young people, Emerson comments, if we can touch the imagination, we serve them. Not if we touch their imagination, but if we touch the imagination. He doesn't make the imagination some small, limited thing. It is larger than any single individual. It encompasses us all, from the child born today in Baghdad, or I might add Gaza City. And yes, we must imagine the reality, coming children to be born in Baghdad or Israel or Gaza City. To the person dying even this moment in that very city, to the student studying for midterms, to the person wondering if they can stay in this country. Without imagination, there is no understanding. Without imagination, I'm tempted to say there is nothing, but with it, there is, well, quite simply, there is every possibility we can imagine and more. Such is its power, such is its potential, such is its energy. Such energy, such power is key to our understandings of ourselves, our place in the world, and our call to act for justice. Experience opens us to imagination, and imagination broadens our ability to seek deeper experiences and deeper connection to this community and connection to all that is. To go out and seek a rainbow connection requires us to dip into the power of imagination. At a very fundamental level, the power of imagination precedes the actual process of planning. Before the renovation you undertook to create this loving sanctuary, you reimagined it, and then you configured this sacred space. Imagining a different kind of world, a world where peace and love are central, is a prerequisite to striving for justice. And such striving is not wild fantasy. Emerson differentiated between what he called fantasy and imagination, saying in an 1875 essay, fantasy relates to surface, wherein a great part of life lies within. Imagination is a perception of an affirming and real relation between a thought and a material fact. Fantasy amuses, imagination expands and exalts. Fantasy is related to color, imagination to form. Fantasy paints, imagination sculpts. Clearly, if we are to construct, as Thoreau advised, the foundations under the castle we build, we need to first imagine those castles. So too, we need to imagine what a better world embedded with systems of true justice and equity and inclusion would look like before we set out to build them. In reflecting on Ralph Waldo Emerson's essay, The Oversoul, the Reverend Dr. Rebecca Parker offered that to live with soul is to live deeply rooted in knowing and feeling that we are connected to one another and to the earth, that our life is held in the embrace of something larger than ourselves, a wisdom, a presence, a grace whose beatitude is accessible to us. She continues, to have soul is to hear life's deep music and to move in response to its pulse, rhythm, and harmony. To have soul is to be awake to life. To have soul is to live with a sensitive awareness of the real presence of other human beings and the earth. It is turning your hands to the work of justice and compassion, your mind to the call of wisdom, your heart to decisions for life. It's making your whole being an act of praise. It was about 5 years after my playground experience when, as a teen, a friend invited me, as I believe I've shared here before, to something called liberal religious youth at the Unitarian Universalist Church in Salem. It was the late 1960s. And then when 1968 rolled around, each of us in this group of liberal dreamers had decided to work on the campaigns of one of the candidates then running for president. We selected amongst those who had called for an end to the war now raging in Vietnam. Some of us worked for Eugene McCarthy. Others, like me, engaged with Robert Kennedy Sr.'s campaign. I made that decision after I went to Portland State to hear RFK speak. From the moment he entered the room, I sensed something special and unique about him. I experienced and discovered what charisma was. I do not remember much of his speech, but I do remember a quote with which he ended his address. It was from George Bernard Shaw. Some look at the world and say, why? I dream things that never can be, and say, why not? That echoes within me as I dream things that perhaps never can be, and still work to turn around that sense of why not. I'd like to close today with another Kermit the Frog song. It's called Imagination, and this one I will try to sing to you. Here in the world of imagination, right in the middle of my head, I look around and my room's not my room, and my bed isn't really my bed. I look around and discover things that are strange and not quite true. But here in the world of imagination, the most remarkable things have a way of being true. The most amazing things can be true when we first imagine and then act to make them true. May it be so. Thank you. And I'd like you to take just a few moments in some shared silence to look at those times, those situations where your imagination, your openness to what Emerson called the oversoul is most present for you. For me, it's the sunrises that appear on the horizon. Here in this part of the planet, we are blessed by so many amazing sunsets. Whatever it is, wherever it is, just breathe into that as we breathe in and out together, imagining uniquely and imagining together as we breathe together in shared silence. Take one full, easy breath in and out, cleansing breath as we return to our time together in this beloved community.